Hello again. Welcome back to Buddha Bites. This is the first episode of the new year, episode 9. And I'm starting with a cookbook because we are going to be working out of a cookbook today. You know, I have seen a lot of memes lately over the past few weeks about eggs. And of course, you and I have talked about eggs a whole lot here. Well, the memes make fun of the fact that eggs are very expensive right now. And these memes are hilarious. I've sent some of them around to my friends. But in a way, it's very unfortunate because we use eggs all the time and we count on them as a staple in our diet, and they're now twice the price or more. The reason for that, according to the New York Times and some other sources, is that there is a rash of avian flu going on right now. That's bird flu. And that causes the prices to go up. Also, as has happened a lot with the pandemic, there are shortages and increases in price of the feed that the chickens need, also the gas, the transport that takes the eggs to transport them to the stores, and there's also an increased price in packaging. So all of these things are coming together to make eggs a lot more expensive for us. I'm still going to do this, and we're going to make a quiche Lorraine today. The great thing about quiche Lorraine is that this particular recipe only takes 3 eggs, and it is going to serve anywhere from 6 to 8 people, so it is still a good value. The quiche Lorraine goes back to about the 16th century or so. It is named after the Lorraine region of the northeastern part of France. And so there is a basic recipe, but I have lots and lots of cookbooks. And I looked in many of them. I found at least 5 recipes. I'm sure that I can find at least 5 more in my collection alone. I wanted very much to use Julia Child's recipe from her Mastering the Art of French Cooking. It's a little slightly more complicated, so I wanted to do something a little bit more simple. I found a recipe in another well-known and well-regarded cookbook, one of my favorites, The Joy of Cooking. This is one of the many editions that have come out over the years, and there's a relatively simple recipe that you can actually modify to suit your tastes. So we are going to take The Joy of Cooking and go into the kitchen to make our own quiche Lorraine. This recipe of quiche Lorraine from The Joy of Cooking calls for a 9-inch pie pan. And it also calls for a 9-inch crust, obviously. Now, you can certainly go to the store and get any of the pre-made crusts that you find in the refrigerated section or the freezer section. I happen to need a lot of practice with pie crust because pie crusts have been my Achilles heel for many years. So I went ahead and made my own. We're not going to really talk about that today. The most important thing is that you have a crust that you're comfortable with, that folds out very nicely into your pan. Now, in retrospect, I would have used a smaller pan, pie plate, because of the way that this shrank up. It's no big deal. The whole thing is going to be filled up. It's going to be gorgeous anyway. But what I did is that I blind baked this shell. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this with all of the recipes. I know Jacques Pepin starts out with a raw pie shell, but this recipe says to blind bake. And blind baking is to bake the shell with nothing in it and let it cool before you put the fillings in and bake it again. So the way that you do that is that you roll out the dough. You prick it with many times. You may see very, very faintly that you prick it a whole bunch of times with the tines of a fork. That is so that when the pie bakes, the crust does not rise up and bubble up, and it makes it difficult to fill down the line. So you do that, but then you also do something else to hold the crust down. Remember the trick with the parchment paper? You take some parchment paper. Now, of course, this is done with with a raw crust. So you put it very gently into your raw crust, and you take pie weights to weigh down the crust so that it doesn't pop down. Now there are pie weights that you can buy from gourmet kitchen stores. You really don't need them. I will show you what I've been using. These are just dry beans. These, in my case, are kidney beans. I've had these beans for many years. You can use them over and over again. And you just take the beans and you put them inside the raw crust, and then you pop it in the oven and you bake it until it sort of holds its shape. And once it's done that, you just remove the beans. And in my case this time, I just brushed it with a little bit of an egg wash. And that's how you get a blind baked crust. We're going to set this down for a little bit, and we are going to show you the process of lining this Quiche Lorraine. Now, the classic Quiche Lorraine recipe does not have cheese in it. But there is a variation in this cookbook, and there are variations in several cookbooks where there is cheese that's used. And when you use it, it's recommended that you use Gruyere cheese. Gruyere is one of the Swiss cheeses. It's in the Swiss cheese family. I didn't happen to have Gruyere. What I did have was a big old block of Swiss cheese. So I've already grated this up, and this will go in the bottom. Now the recipe that calls for Gruyere cheese calls for a cup. So this is going to make a nice generous portion. This is actually more than a cup of Gruyere cheese, so I'm going to set some of this aside for later. And it also calls for rendered bacon. Now when you do this, you want to get the thickest cut of bacon that you possibly can. It makes it easier to cut. And another tip is to make it easier for you to slice into what's called lardons, L-A-R-D-N or L-A-R-D-O-N-S, lardons. You can put your bacon in the freezer for maybe about 20 minutes or so. It just makes it solid enough that once you start to try to make cubes or little dice, it makes it easier to cut. So that's what I did here. Now this recipe calls for 4 ounces of bacon. Now one of the reasons why I didn't use Julia Child's recipe is it hurt my feelings a little bit. Her classic recipe requires you to render off the bacon in water. And that is specifically to take away some of the smokiness from the bacon. That hurt my feelings. I don't want to take flavor away from anything, especially bacon. So I know that that's the classic way. Julia, I could not do it. So I just rendered off this bacon, and we're going to just lay this in here, set a little bit aside. And that is the base of our quiche. And so it's going to go over to the waiting area where we hold it until the custard is made. The custard is extremely simple. There we go. We just take 3 eggs. It's just 3 eggs, y'all. I know it's painful to get eggs these days, but they're still a staple in our diet. They're excellent for you, and they are worth the cost, and it's not going to go on forever. Eventually the price is going to come down. But in the meantime, 3 eggs for 6 to 8 people, I'd say that's still a good value. So we take the eggs and we just break them up a tiny little bit. Tiny little bit. And we add 1.5 cups of heavy cream. It doesn't necessarily have to be heavy cream. This recipe here also says that you can use creme fraiche, half cream and half milk. There are even some recipes that you can do with all whole milk. For the life of me, I would not be doing that. What we want to do is to build a custard, and a custard needs body. You see how thick this is with the eggs? I don't want to compromise that. And this is not the sort of thing that you're going to eat every day, and you're just going to have one slice of it. You're probably going to have a salad with it. Just do the thing that gives it bulk. We will add just a tiny bit of salt because, of course, the bacon is salty enough. This recipe calls for just a half a teaspoon. And I use table salt. I'm not using kosher salt in this case because it didn't say kosher salt in the recipe. Kosher salt acts differently than regular table salt. So when I just see salt, I just use the regular salt that I grew up with. So half a teaspoon, and it says 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. I'm trying to get out of the habit of using ground pepper because all the experts say that once it's ground, the flavor is mostly gone. So even now that I'm grinding this, I'm smelling the wonderful aroma of black pepper. I know that the experts are right. So let's try to get accustomed to eventually replacing our pre-ground pepper and getting a decently priced, inexpensive pepper mill. Just do your own. Now, the recipe also calls for the custard for ground nutmeg. Nutmeg, I don't know how to describe it. It has a certain sweetness and a certain, it's sort of sweet and a little savory also. And it has a little bit of a spice to it, and it boosts the flavor of a custard. You can hardly even tell that nutmeg is in there, but you can kind of tell if it's not, because you'll know that something is missing. Now, I have ground nutmeg. I'll probably use it eventually. I'm not going to use it now. I'm going to pull out my trusty microplane and a beautiful piece of whole nutmeg. Just to let you know what it looks like on the inside. Isn't this gorgeous? It's like a work of art. This is so pretty. But I'm not going to use this right now because it comes dangerously close to hurting me. So we will take our microplane. And by the way, I'm going to tell you something else about the microplane in just a little bit. This recipe only calls for a pinch of freshly grated or ground nutmeg. Now, you don't need as much when it's freshly grated because obviously it has more flavor. So we're going to stop right there with our nutmeg, and we're going to save the rest of the nutmeg. Oh, I love the aroma, for some other time. And we're just going to mix this together. Now I'm going to stop right here and make a confession to you. The last time you and I were together, I used this thing. About an hour after we filmed, I realized that I called it a microplane. It is not a microplane. It is a mandolin. We will not be using it today, but it's been driving me crazy that I called this mandolin a microplane. My apologies. It is a mandolin. Let's move on with life. And this is a microplane. You know, a video is not a video if I don't make my brother-in-law chuckle halfway through. That's wonderful. Okay, so now we have our custard that is ready to go into our beautiful prepared pie dish. Nothing fancy. All this is assembly. And you just pour this over the top. And it fits perfectly into the shell. And I don't have to do this, but I have to do this. You know you've seen this before, right? I love this bear. This makes me so happy. So you want to get the last, especially since it was so hard to get the heavy cream, remember? And it's getting harder and harder to get eggs. In fact, some of the grocery stores are putting a limit on the amount of cartons of eggs that you can buy. So I'm not letting any of this go. But that is all there is to it. So we take our prepared raw quiche. We're going to put it on a baking dish. We're going to put it on a sheet pan. Now, this is not likely to happen because my pan is a little on the larger side, but sometimes there's the likelihood of it boiling over in the oven. So you always want to protect your oven by putting it on a nice sheet pan when you put it in. This oven has been preheating to 375 degrees. And we are going to put our quiche in. I think it goes for about 25 to 35 minutes. If you look at it and you see that the crust is beginning to get browner while the center isn't as cooked as you like, all you need to do is to take some strips of aluminum foil. I did this on the previous one that I did earlier today. And you just take it out and you just put this around the edges of your pie crust and then put it back in the oven, continue to bake it. Now this is one of those times when there's an actual device called a pie shield. I'm thinking about getting one because this is annoying to do. But it is an option until you buy it. So we're going to leave this to do its thing, and I'm going to show you what I did before you got here. This is the classic Quiche Lorraine. You see how well it firmed up and how perfectly brown the crust is? This is lovely as it is. And in this case, I did not use the cheese. I did a classic recipe, the original recipe that goes back to the 1600s for you to try. And so that is what we are going to slice into right now. I am so hungry. I can't wait to cut into this beautiful Quiche Lorraine finally. Now, you might wonder if that custard would actually make which is actually a solid pie. And it does. Oh goodness, look at this. I'm going to make myself a relatively modest slice. And it's holding up beautifully. Great crust. If I do say so myself, I've worked so hard at pie crusts. And let's lift this out. The first slice is always the toughest. Look at this. Now, remember, this is the one without the Gruyere cheese. This is the one without the Swiss cheese. And it still has this gorgeous custardy consistency. So we are going to set this down on the plate. And I'm going to move this over because I want to get a little bite of this. Now, you're going to get tired of me saying this, that this goes well with a salad. This goes well with a salad. Everything goes well with a salad. Also, I'm trying to eat more salads. And if I may say so, so should you. So we have a very rich and creamy main dish. So it only makes sense to have it with something bright and fresh and raw. So I just made a lovely romaine salad and put a gorgeous balsamic drizzle on it. Just a very simple salad. But enough talking, let me get a bite of this. Not a lot of ingredients, but a load of flavor and a fantastic consistency. You can have this warm. It reheats well if you want it hot. You can even have it at room temperature. It's perfect. You can even have it cold for lunch. It is just ideal. Breakfast, brunch, dinner, all the meals. Snack at 2 a.m. No. I am not a wine expert by any means. I'm learning. But so I checked with a couple of my trusted sources, Food and Wine Magazine, and my good friend Toffer, who is an absolute wine expert. And they agree that the Quiche Lorraine pairs beautifully with wines from France, specifically wines from the Alsace region. Now this is a Trimblach Riesling. What they say, if you want a white wine, the Riesling is good from this region because it's not too sweet, but it has a nice fruitiness, a little bit of dryness that cuts through the richness of a dish like this. So if you want to go with a white wine, Riesling is a great way to go. Or a Beaujolais or a Pinot Noir. Now, when I read Beaujolais, I thought immediately of the Beaujolais Village. This is very easy to get at the wine and spirits store. And it also is from the region in France where you can find a Quiche Lorraine. It is nice and light. It's a red that does not overpower something like this, but again, it cuts through the fattiness of this. It's a perfect foil. And it's light. It may not look light to the eye, but it has a very light taste to it. Now, if you really want to spring for something that's a couple of extra bucks, this was recommended to me also. It's called Fleury, and it is 100% Gamay grapes. And this one, and it's a relatively young wine. You see that it's a little bit lighter, almost light like a Pinot Noir would be. You see that? So let me see if this lives up to the recommendations. Ooh, it almost has a little bit more of an earthiness to it. I smell a little bit of ash, a little bit of dark berry. This is gorgeous. Listen, it's the wintertime. It's dark outside. You need to treat yourself. You need to stretch your dollar. This Quiche Lorraine is a great way to go. And if you do indulge, treat yourself to a nice glass of wine. These are not that expensive. The most expensive was like $24. So try this at home. You can riff on it like you riff on anything else. You can do it with vegetables. You can even do it without a crust. So try it at home. Tell me how you like it in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. This is Iris Fairfax from Buddha Bites. You are the Buddha.